The distributive property is a property of multiplication that we learned earlier in 5th and 6th grade through breaking apart multiplication problems. We're going to go over it with models and problems in this lesson. Let's consider the problem 12 times 45. If we were to make a model of 12 times 45, we could make an array, and we're going to make an unmarked array that looks like this. So we have our array, and we could say this is a 12 by 45 array. And if we were thinking of this as a real life situation, we could say this is a yard that is 12 feet by 45 feet. And to multiply that, we would do 12 times 45 to get the area. Now let's say we wanted to break apart the 45. We could break that apart into a smaller number that's actually easier to work with. And when I say break apart, I mean add. So we're going to add two numbers to get to 45. And a lot of times if we just put it into expanded form, so we could say 45 is the same as 40 plus 5, that breaks apart 45 into 40 plus 5. And again, breaking apart for this is addition, not multiplication. We're not multiplying two numbers to get to 45, we're adding them. And the easiest way to break apart a number to add is to break it into expanded form. So we're going to break apart 45 into 40 and 5, which would just look like this. We would have one part that was 40, and one part that was 5. And if we have a rectangle and that's 12 over here, that means the length of that rectangle is also 12 over here. So that means we have a rectangle broken up into two rectangles now. We have this one that was 12 times 40, and then we have this little one that is 12 times 5. We broke up this rectangle from 45 into 40 plus 5 into two rectangles. This rectangle went down here, this rectangle went down here. So we have a 12 by 40 rectangle plus a 12 by 5 rectangle. And doing 12 times 40 is the same thing as doing 12 times 4 and adding a 0. So we get 48 is 12 times 4, and add a 0 is 480. Plus 12 times 5, that's a times table problem, that's 60. So all we have to do now is add 480 plus 60, and if you need to, you can just write it vertically. And we get 540. So we're going to recap the problem we did, 12 times 45. When first we used an array or a model. We had an array of 12 by 45. We broke apart the 45 into 40 plus 5, and we also discussed how 45, when we break something apart, we're talking about addition in this case. So we broke that apart into two rectangles where one, we had the 40 by 12 rectangle plus a 5 by 12 rectangle, because the length at the top was 45 and we cut it down and made this go over here. That was the 5 by 12, and this section went over here, was the 40 by 12. So this problem for this rectangle or array is 40 times 12 plus 5 times 12. And 40 times 12, as we said, was 480. And 5 times 12 was 60. and we add those together, we get 540. Now I'm going to show you how to do this without a model right next to where we used a model. We're going to say that 12, we're still going to multiply it by 45, but we're going to go ahead and break it up 45 apart into 40 plus 5. Because the sum of 40 and 5 gives us 45. Now, we use the distributive property to multiply the 12 with the 40 and to multiply it with the 5. So that would make this problem into 12 times 40 plus 12 times 5. So you see, we can look over at our problem that we solved with the models and see the same multiplication problems, but now we just are showing the math instead of the models. 12 times 40 is 480, plus 12 times 5, which is 60. And when we do that math, we get 540. So we get the same answer, but we're using the math to break apart the number and distribute the 12 to the 40 and the 5 and add the two products together. So now we have the definition of distributive property, which is probably going to make more sense than if you saw the definition first. The distributive property means to multiply a sum by a number, multiply each addend by the number outside the parentheses. For example, if we wanted to solve something like 7 times 62, we can make that 62 into a sum of a number like 60 plus 2. So we could multiply 7 times 60 plus 2. Another way you might see that is with the 7 glued to the parentheses. And note that if you ever see any number or variable glued to parentheses, there should be a multiplication sign in there. That means they want you to multiply. So 7 times the quantity of 60 plus 2. If we go by the distributive property definition, we multiply each addend by the number outside of the parentheses. So, and this is why I like the distributive property, because you distribute or give the 7 to the 60 and the 7 to the 2. So we multiply the 7 times the 60 plus the 7 times the 2. And we go ahead and we do our math now to solve our expression or evaluate our expression. 7 times 60 is 420 because 7 times 6 is 42, and we add the 0, plus 7 times 2. 7 times 2 is 14. We add the 14 to the 420, and our answer is 434. So we use the distributive property to break apart a number, 62, into 60 plus 2. And we had the 7 outside of the parentheses. We multiply each addend by the number outside of the parentheses in this step to get 420 plus 14, which got us 434. So we went over how to use the distributive property to solve numerical expressions, but we're also going to use the distributive property to rewrite algebraic expressions. And sometimes you might see a problem like this, where the directions say use the distributive property to rewrite each algebraic expression. And just because you see a variable in parentheses next to a number outside of parentheses doesn't mean it's overwhelming or anything. Remember, the distributive property just means that you're distributing the number outside by multiplying it to the two addends inside of the parentheses. So all this would mean that we're multiplying 5 times the x plus, and don't forget that that is a plus sign, 5 times the 8. You're multiplying with the 8 and you're multiplying with the x. So this will be 5x plus, and then 5 times 8. And we're going to go ahead and write out 5 times 8. 5x, we can't really do anything with it because it's already an algebraic part of the expression with a variable, so it's already simplified enough. But we can simplify the 5 times 8, and 5 times 8 is 40. So we have rewritten this algebraic expression into 5x times 40 by using the distributive property to distribute the 5 times the x to the 5 times the 5 times the 8 and adding the two products together. So what we're going to do is one last problem together from beginning to end, and then I'm going to have you do 3 independent problems on your own. The first one we're going to do is 12 times 32. And let's go ahead and break up the 32. We're going to use the distributive property to evaluate this expression. We can break up the 32 into 30 plus 2. And if we made a model of that, that would be a rectangle or an array, and it would be a 12 by 32 rectangle. And if we wanted to split it up, we would just split it up into a 30 plus 2 rectangle. So we would have a 12. This part would be 30, and this would be the 2. And our first rectangle would be 12 by 30. And then our second rectangle would be 12 by 2. So we have that model. And that would give us 2 multiplication problems, 12 times 30 plus 12 times 2. And let's go ahead and pick up over here where we just show using numbers. What we would do, we would put this 30 plus 2 in parentheses, and we're just going to glue the 12 next to the parentheses, 12 times the quantity of 30 plus 2. And we're going to use the distributive property to create 2 multiplication problems. Multiply the 12 times the 30 plus the 12 times the 2. So we're going to multiply the 12 times the 30 plus the 12 times the 2. And we have the exact same problem over here as we did when we did our models. So 12 times 3 is 36, and we add a 0 to get our 12 times 30. Plus, and then 12 times 2 is 24. So we have 360 plus 24, which would give us 384 as an answer. And that would be the same thing down here. 12 times 30 is 360, plus 12 times 2 is 24, and we get our answer as 384. Now I want you to try these practice problems on your own. Make sure you show your work and come to class with any questions you might have. For the first 2 problems, you have 4 times 38 and 11 times 27. For the first one, you should break apart the 38 into 2 numbers that add together to give you 38. Then use the distributive property to solve it like the other examples we did. With 11 times 27, you should probably break apart the 27 into 2 numbers that add together to give you 27. Then continue on using the distributive property to solve the problem. For the last one, you're rewriting the expression using the distributive property. That's when we already have our expression broken up, and we distribute the 3 to both of the addends to rewrite it in a different form.